I'm joined today by Russell Quirk.
Good morning.
I don't really need to give you any other sort of Aston or title. You are just Russell Quirk of Quirk.
It's just me.
Lord Quirk of Quirkiness.
That sounds great.
I mean, let's just have a quick conversation between us before we go on to other news about assisted dying. Where do you stand on this?
I think if you're a libertarian, and I think I am, I believe in freedom of choice. And I think if you are in a situation where you're ill and you designate and nominate that you would like to be assisted with regard to the end of your life because of the pain that you're in or that you anticipate you're going to be in, I think with safeguards, whether it be by way of medical sign-off or legal sign-off, obviously there must be safeguards. There are safeguards in this bill, and of course there is a big question mark over this, Alex, in terms of what those safeguards are. And indeed, if you do need the sign-off of, let's say, 2 medical professionals and 2 judges, how long that takes, because last time I looked, the NHS and the judiciary, neither of those organisations were particularly swift in, I was going to say executing on things.
Herein lies my
concern.
The detail is that you have to get one doctor to diagnose you with 6 months left to live and of sound mind. Then a week later, a second doctor has to be able to do the same. Then there's a 2-week cooling off period, and then a judge has to then sign this off. Now, we know the huge backlogs in the NHS. We know the huge backlogs
in the court system.
In the judicial system. We also know there'll be doctors who feel very uncomfortable about this. They swear by a Hippocratic oath, mean no harm, and actually knowing that what they're doing, rather than what has been the complete reverse of their profession, which is under all circumstances try and protect and preserve life, suddenly be part of a process where they will be taking that away.
Yeah, but there's an argument that if someone, so my mother, for instance, she died 15 years ago of cancer, and for weeks beforehand was in acute pain, mitigated by morphine, which was, yes, you know, self-administered. But if she'd been in a position, I think, frankly, if she'd been asked if she wanted to end her life slightly earlier, she probably would have said yes. That, from a doctor's perspective, you could argue, I think quite convincingly, is actually in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, on the basis that that patient is saying, I do not want to suffer anymore, and I am deciding that I want to end the suffering now. Then I don't see really how the doctor involved can say, well, this is the wrong thing to do.
My other concern about this is that, let's take, for instance, the year running up to June 2023 to 24. There were 13,784 cases against the NHS for negligence. That's 37 a day, 1 every 40 minutes of negligence. And the NHS have had to pay out £2.8 billion in compensation in that year. £2.8 billion in compensation for medical negligence. Do you know how much money the government gives to hospices and end-of-life care?
Zero.
Well, 350 million.
It's hardly anything.
It's
they have
hardly
to be
anything.
Self-funded.
It's all done by self-funding. My concern is this, and I'm going to leave the fact that I'm actually also opposed to this on for religious reasons, but my main concern, if I lift that out, is this. My concern is we start off in a position where I understand all the humanity behind this and the choice element, and indeed had a very close relative who suffered incredibly with MS and considered Switzerland. So it's also something very close to my heart. But my huge concern is, at the moment, what we have in place is these 3 checking systems. Now, it won't be long before we have a thing where a doctor says, well, I thought they were only going to live 6 months, and actually it could have been longer, or the doctors disagree. I mean, even Esther Ranson, who really sort of brought this into the foreground, and the legislation now says those who know they've only got 6 months left to live. She thought she was only going to live until last Christmas. A year later, she's still here campaigning on this. So how does a doctor come to the conclusion that this is definitely only 6 months you've got left? Then the argument is that, you know, the person who wants to end their life has to administer the drug themselves. They have to either be able to drink this lethal dose. And of course, if people have crippling, debilitating physical conditions, they won't be able to do that. So then the other suggestion is, well, OK, it could end up being a needle and a button they press. You can see how quickly it'll be, well, that can't happen either. And this can't happen, and that can't happen. So then it will get down the line of, well, OK, there'll be an amendment and someone administers it. Then around the drug, there will be, when you look at things like lethal injections and so on and so forth, there have been cases, and many cases, where it hasn't worked, where people have suffered for about 100 hours waiting for this drug to impact. So then it will be this, once the bill is passed, it will be more quietly amended. OK, well, let's now allow this drug to be used. Well, let's allow this method. Then it will be those sort of narco pods, and then it will be anyone can do it. And then it'll be like, well, I've got 2 years to live, but I'm in great sufferings. Then there'll be a court case on that, an amendment. And I can just see what happens. You open the very first door, the first step to saying the state now has the power to be part in killing somebody.
Yeah, but there's a lot of presumptions there in what you just said.
But I think with any legislation, what we've seen is that in every single instance,
yes, but
it
I think,
starts and it continues and mushrooms.
Maybe, and look, I think because this is so serious, this is, you know, end of life, this is someone's life, I think there has to be the safeguard that it has to be self-administered. Don't forget, look, we already have situations in medicine, apparently, not that I'm qualified in medicine by any stretch, but you know, do not resuscitate, for instance. You know, you as a patient can, you know, effectively put a sign above your bed at home or in hospital saying do not resuscitate. So, you know, if you do fall unconscious, if your heart stops, you know, and you could be resuscitated, the patient can already say, I do not want you to do so. Can I just make a very cheap political point as well, and one that MPs...
Make an expensive one.
Well, it could be expensive, actually, and one that MPs on the Labour side of the House of Commons today should consider. You've already set a precedent, Labour MPs, for assisted dying. It's called withdrawing the winter fuel allowance from thousands and thousands of pensioners.
This is again my problem. You know, so let's talk about what's going on in that debate. Speaking of the Commons, Kim Leadbeater, she is, of course, the person who brought this bill to the fore, assisted dying. She says it contains the most robust and strongest set of safeguards in the world. As I said, my prediction will be that if they're the most robust and the strongest now, there'll be multiple ongoing court cases if this gets passed from this day forward to change them, to alter them. Legal cases, I don't meet the threshold, this person did, this was done wrong, that shouldn't have been decided. That's my prediction. She said there are very strict eligibility criteria. Like I said, they will change. And multiple layers of checks and safeguards embedded in the bill. Like I said, they will change. None of which exist at the moment. For me, it's just about the precedent underneath it all. And I would rather return to this debate, personally, because I'm not saying that my personal view should affect anyone else's. I would rather return to this debate when the government, instead of paying billions to putting migrants in hotels, are paying more than 350 million for hospices.
Yeah,
I'd rather return to the debate when the NHS is fit and healthy. I'd rather return to the debate when people know their GP, and that GP has been a family doctor and knows that patient inside out and can testify in full confidence that this person's not under duress, that they're of sound mind, that every single medical treatment has been done to the best of the ability of the NHS, that there has been no medical negligence, that actually when it's only 6 months left to live, that is absolutely watertight. Because at the moment, you can't even get a GP appointment. When you're in care, your doctor changes every 5 seconds.
Well, unless you're an asylum seeker, if you come over on a boat, you now get, apparently, as you're put up in your 4-star hotel, many of them now are allowing private medical attention on a weekly basis in those asylum hotels because, of course, the NHS can't cope. So we, the taxpayer, the government, the taxpayer, are paying for private medical attention and care for asylum seekers that literally rocked up at Dover 5 minutes ago. That is happening in this country now. And at the same time, you talk about budgets. There is an easy £40 billion that we can now reallocate to such things as not having to impose this outrageous inheritance tax on farmers, to give pensioners back their winter fuel allowance, to put more money into palliative care, as you're talking about. That is to withdraw the foreign aid budget, that's £8 billion, not to do this stupid carbon capture thing that Ed Miliband is absolutely psychotic about, frankly, 22 billion, and the 11 billion, of course, that's going in so-called climate change mitigation, which we're giving to other countries. There you go, £40 billion I've just saved the taxpayer.
Exactly, and only 350 million on palliative care. Hospices require 2/3 of their funding to come from having charity shops. It shouldn't be that way.
No, it shouldn't.
Talking about it, because like I said, for me, the legal precedence of giving the state the ability to legally be part of killing someone, Because this is killing.
But hang on, it's not. But I've seen some commentators on social media this last few days saying this is state-sponsored murder. That's preposterous.
Oh,
That's
I wouldn't
not
go
what
that far as to say it's state-sponsored murder, because murder has a different level of intent. But it is killing, because this isn't someone... Assisted dying is enabling someone to kill themselves. Let's just use the word because it is killing.
Or is it sympathetic?
Well, it could be a sympathetic killing, but it's still a killing.
It's sympathetically
putting
someone out of their misery.
Right, but it's
at their choice.
This is avoiding a word that's uncomfortable, but it is an uncomfortable debate. That is the point, and I think we need to use that word because that is what it is. We can't just gloss over with words that make us feel comfortable, like, oh, you know, top surgery.
So what
it's killing
What
somebody.
do you think about MPs like Rupert Lowe, who's been criticised over the last 24 hours for asking his constituents? So bearing in mind this is a free vote in the House of Commons, which is the right thing to do. So Rupert Lowe, who's the Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, has said, look, I'm on the fence on this. I genuinely don't know what I think, really, in terms of making a decision here. So I'm going to ask my constituents.
I think that's exactly what he should do.
He's put out a poll, which apparently has been responded to actually by only 1,100 of his 100,000 constituents, by the way. And actually it's come down in favour by a remarkable majority, something like 75-25 of his constituents in Great Yarmouth have said, yes, we're for this on the basis of choice.
That actually reflects,
but he's been criticised for not making a decision. I think he's done exactly the right thing.
I think he's done exactly the right thing. And that breakdown, the 75% in favour, actually reflects what we are hearing, anyway, of where the national sentiment is. And with something like this, I think that's exactly the responsible thing to do. I would argue that this has gone through too quickly. We haven't really had... You know, we spent a lot longer debating whether we should leave a trade union, which I'm altogether for, and this is about really changing, for the first time in living history, the legality of the state being part in authorising somebody to kill themselves. And I don't think that enough attention has been given to this. And I would also add, we're in a situation right now where trust in the NHS, trust in the judicial services, trust in our government is the lowest it's ever been. And this is the exact moment that they want to give those entities the power to sign off on decisions about life and death. And that alarms me. Now, interesting, I'm going to segue somewhat clumsily into another story, which is about Louise Haigh, who's the Transport Secretary. Well, she was. She's resigned. She was investigated by her former employer, Aviva Insurance, ironically, and the police, after she had reported her work phone stolen when she was mugged in 2013. Later on, that phone pinged, and apparently it was alive and well.
In her drawer at home.
And in her drawer at home. And she talks about it being a terrifying experience, that she was mugged. She said she reported it to the police, gave officers a list of what had been taken, including the phone. She later discovered it had not been taken. And she'd had another work phone.
Discovered it had not been taken. It's not a burglary.
I don't really know how you
she's
can
mugged
be
on the street
mugged and you
thought that they took a phone.
It's funny.
It's quite a substantial thing.
I've been someone attempted to mug me for my phone. You know when the phone is either gone or not.
But then also, just to be very, very clear, so she thought she had it taken by a mugger in the street and couldn't really remember whether she had on. And then she finds it at home and then doesn't tell the police that she's found it.
The thing I find ironic here, and this is where I come back to trust in government, trust in the judiciary, over important issues, big important issues like life or death. So she says the original work device being switched on triggered police attention, and I was asked to come in for questioning. My solicitor advised me not to comment during that interview, and I regret following that advice. The police referred the matter to the CPS, and I appeared before Southwark magistrates. Under the advice of my solicitor, I pleaded guilty, despite the fact this was a genuine mistake from which I did not make any gain. The magistrates accepted all of these arguments and gave me the lowest possible outcome available, a discharge. Now, people who might have gone to a protest would have been urged to plead guilty. And I don't believe that they've been given the lowest possible outcome, have they?
Quite the opposite.
Here we go. The CPS again. Plead guilty. Oh, well, you've not done anything before. You can just have a discharge. This is what I'm talking about. This is what has changed in 2024. And these are the people now saying we want the states, the same judges who've just been sending a load of people for social media posts to prison. The same NHS of Lucy Letby, who either had in their midst a prolific baby killer or had such failings that they covered it up and actually have allowed a woman to walk to an unforgivable fate. Now, I don't know anything about, I don't have any particular position on this one, but that same NHS, of the 2.8 billion claims of medical negligence a year, this same judiciary, who have just put a load of people in prison for social media posts, are now, at the moment, according to this government, should be the very people who can decide over life or death. In unprecedented manoeuvres in this country, the government's never been allowed to sanction somebody being killed. Yeah. That's my argument. It's not about... I get the humanity. I get it so painfully and personally. I just don't feel that in the context of 2024, we're ready, that this is being done the right way. That is my huge alarm. Yeah,
just to segue back for a second, the Louise Haigh thing is important. Now, obviously, she has done the right thing and immediately resigned today because she's been found out, right? Not because she felt she'd done anything wrong, because if she felt she'd done anything wrong, she wouldn't have stood for Parliament in that seat in the first place, because she stood for Parliament only 6 months after that conviction. And by the way, the conviction was for fraud. This wasn't an accident. This was her pleading guilty and therefore being convicted of fraud. That, it seems, was not declared to her local association. She still stood. She hasn't told her electorate in various elections. I think she stood in 15, 19 and 2024. And importantly, Alex, Keir Starmer was told about this in 2020, and apparently his attitude to it was, yeah, it's fine. So Keir Starmer has enabled someone to come into his cabinet that has a conviction for fraud. Yet again, we must seriously question, not just Louise Haigh here in terms of her honesty and her overseeing a £30 billion transport budget and clearly being questionable in that regard. Yet again, we really must question Keir Starmer's judgment. Also, one thing I don't understand, and I don't know if this is some sort of typo in this article here, but second paragraph says she was convicted of fraud in a police investigation involving stolen and missing mobile phones, plural. Yes. So how many muggings and how many phones was it? I don't know. We don't know. It's not been reported, but it definitely smells. But she's done the right thing. She's done the right thing. Rachel Reeves, over to you.